Two of the dramas contained in this volume are the most celebrated of all Calderón's writings. The first, La vida y el sueño, has been translated into many languages and performed with success on almost every stage in Europe but that of England. So late as the winter of 1866-7, in a Russian version, it drew crowded houses to the Great Theatre of Moscow, while a few years earlier, as if to give a signal proof of the reality of its title, and that life was indeed a dream, the Queen of Sweden expired in the theatre of Stockholm during the performance of La vida y el sueño. In England, the play has been much studied for its literary value and the exceeding beauty and lyrical sweetness of some passages, but with the exception of a version by John Oxenford published in the Monthly Magazine for 1842, which being in blank verse does not represent the form of the original, no complete translation into English has been attempted. Some scenes translated with considerable elegance in the metre of the original were published by Archbishop Trench in 1856, but these comprised only a portion of the graver division of the drama. The present version of the entire play has been made with the advantages which the author's long experience in the study and interpretation of Calderón has enabled him to apply to this masterpiece of the great Spanish poet. All the forms of verse have been preserved, while the closeness of the translation may be inferred from the fact that not only the whole play but every speech and fragment of a speech are represented in English in the exact number of lines of the original, without the sacrifice, it is to be hoped, of one important idea. A note by Hartzenbusch in the last edition of the drama published at Madrid, 1872, tells that La vida y el sueño is founded on a story which turns out to be substantially the same as that with which English students are familiar as the foundation of the famous induction to the Taming of the Shrew. Calderón found it, however, in a different work from that in which Shakespeare met with it, or rather his predecessor, the anonymous author of The Taming of a Shrew, whose work supplied to Shakespeare the materials of his own comedy. On this subject Malone thus writes: "The circumstance on which the induction to the anonymous play, as well as to the present comedy, Shakespeare's Taming of the Shrew, is founded, is related, as Langbaine has observed, by Hudorus, Rerum Bergen lib 4. The earliest English original of this story in prose that I have met with is the following, which is found in Goulart's admirable and memorable histories, translated by E. Grimstone, Quarto, 1607, but this tale, which Goulart translated from Hudorus, had undoubtedly appeared in English, in some other shape, before 1594. Philip called the good Duke of Burgundy, in the memory of our ancestors, being at Bruxelles with his court, and walking one night after supper through the streets, accompanied by some of his favourites, he found lying upon the stones a certain artisan that was very drunk, and that slept soundly. It pleased the prince and this artisan to make trial of the vanity of our life, whereof he had before discoursed with his familiar friends. He therefore caused this sleeper to be taken up, and carried into his palace. He commands him to be laid in one of the richest beds, a rich nightcap to be given him, his foolish shirt to be taken off, and to have another put on him of fine holland. When as this drunkard had digested his wine, and began to awake, behold there comes about his bed pages and grooms of the Duke's chamber, who draw the curtains, make many courtesies, and being bareheaded, ask him if it please him to rise, and what apparel it would please him to put on that day. They bring him rich apparel. This new monsieur, amazed at such courtesy, and doubting whether he dreamt or waked, suffered himself to be dressed, and led out of the chamber. There came noblemen which saluted him with all honor, and conduct him to the mass, where with great ceremony they give him the book of the gospel, and the pyx to kiss, as they did usually to the Duke. From the mass they bring him back unto the palace, he washes his hands, and sits down at the table well furnished. After dinner, the great chamberlain commands cards to be brought with a great summy of money. This Duke in imagination plays with the chief of the court. Then they carry him to walk in the garden, and to hunt the hare, and to hawk. They bring him back into the palace, where he sups in state. Candles being light, the musicians begin to play, and the tables taken away, the gentlemen and gentlewomen fell to dancing. Then they played a pleasant comedy, after which followed a banquet, whereat they had presently store of apocras and precious wine, with all sorts of confitures, to this prince of the new impression, so as he was drunk, and fell soundly asleep. Hereupon the Duke commanded that he should be disrobed of all his riche attire. He was put into his old rags, and carried into the same place, where he had been found the night before, where he spent that night. Being awake in the morning, he began to remember what had happened before. He knew not whether it were true indeed, or a dream that had troubled his brain. But in the end, after many discourses, he concludes that all was but a dream that had happened unto him, and so entertained his wife, his children, and his neighbors, without any other apprehension. It is curious to find that the same anecdote which formed the induction to the original Taming of a Shrew, and which, from a comic point of view, Shakespeare so wonderfully developed in his own comedy, Calderon invested with such solemn and sublime dignity in La Vida y el Sueño. He found it, as Señor Hartzenbusch points out in the edition of 1872 already quoted, in the very amusing Viaje entretenido of Agustín de Rojas, which was first published in 1603. Hartzenbusch refers to the modern edition of Rojas, Madrid, 1793, Tomo I, pages 261, 262, 263, but in a copy of the Lerida edition of 1615, in my own possession, I find the anecdote at folios 118, 119, 120. There are some slight differences between the version of Rojas and that of Goulart, but the incidents and the persons are the same. The conclusion to which the artisan arrived at, in the version of Goulart, that all had been a dream, is expressed more strongly by the Duke himself and the story is told by Rojas. Y dijo entonces el duque, vis aquí, amigos, lo que es el mundo, todo es un sueño, pues esto verdaderamente ha pasado por este, como habéis visto, y lo parece que lo ha soñado. The story in all probability came originally from the East. Mr. Lane in his translation of the 1001 Nights gives a very interesting narrative which he believes to be founded on an historical fact in which Harun al-Rashid plays the part of the good Duke of Burgundy, and Abu al-Hasan the original of Christopher Sly. The gravity of the treatment and certain incidents in this Oriental story recall more strongly Calderon's drama than the induction to the Taming of the Shrew. La Vida y el Sueño was first published either at the end of 1635 or beginning of 1636. The approbation for its publication, along with 11 other dramas, not 9 as Archbishop Trench has stated, was signed on the 6th of November in the former year by the official licensor, Juan Bautista de Sasa. The volume was edited by the poet's brother, Don Joseph Calderón. So scarce has this first authorized collection of any of Calderon's dramas become, that a Spanish writer Don Vicente García de la Huerta, in his Teatro Español, Part Segunda, Tomo 30, denies the existence of this volume of 1635, and states that it did not appear until 1640. As if to corroborate this view, Barrera in his Catalogo del Teatro Antiguo Español gives the date 1640 to the Primera Parte de Comedias de Calderón edited by his brother Joseph. There can be no doubt, however, that the volume appeared in 1635 or 1636 as stated. In 1637 Don Joseph Calderón published the second part of his brother's dramas containing like the former volume 12 plays *. In his dedication of this volume to D. Rodrigo de Mendoza, Joseph Calderón expressly alludes to the first part of his brother's comedies which he had printed. En la primera parte, excelentísimo señor, de las comedias que imprimí de Don Pedro Calderón de la Barca, mi hermano, etc. This of course settles the fact of the prior publication of the first part. It is singular, however, to find that the most famous of all Calderon's dramas should have been frequently ascribed to Lope de Vega. So late as 1857 it is given in an Italian version by Giovanni La Sicilia, under the title of La Vida y el Sogno, as a drama of Lope de Vega, with the date 1628. This of course is a mistake, but Señor Hartzenbusch, who makes no allusion to this circumstance, admits that 2 dramas of Lope de Vega, which it is presumed preceded the composition of Calderon's play, turn on very nearly the same incidents as those of La Vida y el Sueño. These are Lo que ha de ser, and Barlon y Josafa. He gives a passage from each of these dramas which seem to be the germ of the fine lament of Sigismund, which the reader will find translated in the present volume. Footnote, * in the library of the British Museum there is a fine copy of this Segunda Parte de Comedias de Don Pedro Calderón de la Barca, Madrid, 1637. Mr. Ticknor mentions, 1863, that he too had a copy of this interesting volume. Señor Hartzenbusch, in the edition of Calderón's La Vida y el Sueño, already referred to, Madrid, 1872, prints the passages from Lope de Vega's two dramas, but in neither of them, he justly remarks, can we find anything that at all corresponds to this grandioso character de Segismundo? The second drama in this volume, The Wonderful Magician, is perhaps better known to poetical students in England than even the first, from the spirited fragment Shelley has left us in his Scenes from Calderon. The preoccupation of a subject by a great master throws immense difficulties in the way of anyone who ventures to follow in the same path, but as Shelley allowed himself great license in his versification, and either from carelessness or an imperfect knowledge of Spanish is occasionally unfaithful to the meaning of his author, it may be hoped in my own version that strict fidelity both as to the form as well as substance of the original may be some compensation for the absence of those higher poetical harmonies to which many of my readers will have been accustomed. El Mágico Prodigioso appeared for the first time in the same volume as La Vida y el Sueño, prepared for publication in 1635 by Don Joseph Calderón. The translation is comprised in the same number of lines as the original, and all the preceding remarks on life as a dream, whether in reference to the period of the first publication of the drama in Spain, or the principles I kept in view while attempting this version may be applied to it. As in the case of Life as a Dream, The Wonderful Magician has previously been translated entire by an English writer, Justina, by J.H. 1848, but as Archbishop Trench truly observes, the writer did not possess that command of the resources of the English language, which none more than Calderón requires. The legend on which Calderón founded El Mágico Prodigioso will be found in Surius, De Probatis Sanctorum Historias, T.V., Colonel A.Gr. 1574, page 351, Vidicni Martyrium SS Cipriani et Justini, Autor Simeoni Metaphrased, and in chapter Xlii, of the Legenda Aurea of Jacobus de Voragine de Sancta Justina Virgin. The martyrdom of the saints took place in the year 290, and their festival is celebrated by the Church on the 26th of September. Mr. Ticknor in his History of Spanish Literature, 1863, Volume 2. Page 369, says that the wonder-working magician is founded on the same legend on which Milman has founded his Martyr of Antioch. This is a mistake of the learned writer. The Martyr of Antioch is founded not on the history of Saint Justina but of Saint Margaret, as Milman himself expressly states. Chapter 93, De Sancta Margarita, in the Legenda Aurea of Jacobus de Voragine contains her story. The third translation in this volume is that of The Purgatory of St. Patrick. This, though perhaps not so famous as the two preceding dramas, is intended to be given by Don P. de la Escosura, in a selection of Calderón's finest comedias, now being edited by him for the Spanish Academy, as the representative piece of its class, namely, the mystical drama founded on the lives of saints. Mr. Ticknor prefers it to the more celebrated Devotion of the Cross, and says that it is commonly ranked among the best religious plays of the Spanish theatre in the 17th century. In all that relates to the famous cave known through the Middle Ages as the Purgatory of St. Patrick, as well as the story of Luis Aeneas, the Owain Miles of ancient English poetry, Calderón was entirely indebted to the little volume published at Madrid, in 1627, by Juan Pérez de Montalván, entitled Vida y Purgatorio de San Patricio. This singular work met with immense success. It went through innumerable editions, and continues to be reprinted in Spain as a chapbook, down to the present day. I have the fifth impression improved and enlarged by the author himself, Madrid, 1628, the year after its first appearance, also a later edition, Madrid, 1664. As early as 1637 a French translation appeared at Brussels by F.A.S. Chartreux, of Bruxelles. In 1642 a second French translation was published at Troyes, by R. P. François Bouillon, de l'Ordre des François, in Bachelier de Theology. Mr. Thomas Wright in his essay on St. Patrick's Purgatory, London, 1844, makes the singular mistake of supposing that Bouillon's Histoire de la vie de Purgatory des Patrices was founded on the drama of Calderon, it being simply a translation of Montalban's Vita y Purgatorio, from which, like itself, Calderón's play was derived. Among other translations of Montalban's work may be mentioned one in Dutch, Brussels, 1668, and one in Portuguese, Lisbon, 1738. It was also translated into German and Italian, but I find no mention of an English version. For this reason I have thought that a few extracts might be interesting, as showing how closely Calderón adhered even to the language of his predecessor. In all that relates to the Purgatory, Montalban's work is itself chiefly compiled from the Florilegium Insulae Sanctorum, Seu Vitae Acti Sanctorum Hiberni, Paris, 1624, folios. This work, which has now become scarce, was written by Thomas Messingham, an Irish priest, the superior of the Irish Seminary in Paris. No complete English version appears to have been made of it, but a small tract in English containing everything in the original work that referred to St. Patrick's Purgatory was published at Paris in 1718. As this tract is perhaps more scarce than even the Florilegium itself, the account of the Purgatory as given by Messingham from the MS of Henry of Saltray is reprinted in the notes to this drama in the quaint language of the anonymous translator. Of this tract, printed at Paris in 1718 without the name of author, publisher or printer, I have not been able to trace another copy. In other points of interest connected with Calderón's drama, particularly to the clearing up of the difficulty hitherto felt as to the confused list of authorities at the end, the reader is also referred to the notes. The present version of the Purgatory of St. Patrick is, with the exception of a few unimportant lines, an entirely new translation. It is made with the utmost care, imitating all the measures and contained, like the two preceding dramas, in the exact number of lines of the original. One passage of the translation which I published in 1853 is retained in the notes, as a tribute of respect to the memory of the late John Rutter Chorley, it having been mentioned with praise by that eminent Spanish scholar in an elaborate review of my earlier translations from Calderón, which appeared in the Athenaeum, November 19 and November 26, 1853. It only remains to add that the text I have followed is that of Hartzenbusch in his edition of Calderón's Comedias, Madrid, 1856, Biblioteca de Autores Españoles. His arrangement of the scenes has been followed throughout, thus enabling the reader in a moment to verify for himself the exactness of the translation by a reference to the original, a crucial test which I rather invite than decline. Clapham Park, Easter, 1873.